I never imagined Christmas dinner would be the night I finally chose my wife over my mother. Looking back, the slap wasn't what ended 27 years of pretending everything was fine. It was my 11-year-old daughter's question afterward. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Christmas Eve in Dublin, Ohio was bitterly cold that year. The kind of cold that turned every breath into a cloud and made the snow squeak beneath your boots. My mother's house glowed with white lights and wreaths, looking like something straight off a Christmas card. If a stranger had driven past, they would have thought our family was perfect. I almost believed it myself. Emily sat beside me in the truck, smoothing the wrinkles out of a brown paper gift bag she decorated with tiny red ribbons. "You think they'll like them?" she asked. I smiled. "They'd have to be crazy not to." She laughed softly, though I could hear the uncertainty underneath. For the past 3 weeks, she'd spent every evening at the kitchen table with Lily, making Christmas ornaments by hand. Little wooden snowflakes painted cardinals stitched, felt stars, tiny names burned into each one with an inexpensive craft tool she'd bought years ago. Money had never been the point. Time was, love was. When we finally walked inside, the house already smelled like baked ham, cinnamon, and fresh rolls. Frank Sinatra played quietly through the living room speakers, while my younger brother Kevin poured drinks. "Merry Christmas," he said, giving me a quick hug. His wife Denise barely looked up from arranging designer gift bags beneath the tree. Every one of them had a familiar department store logo on it. Coach, Nordstrom, Williams-Sonoma. Denise noticed our simple paper bag almost immediately. "Oh," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You two made gifts again." Lily beamed. "We made everybody something." She couldn't wait to hand them out. Emily squeezed her shoulder proudly. Watching them together always reminded me how lucky I was. For nearly 15 years, we'd believed we'd never have children. 2 miscarriages, endless doctor appointments, more tears than either of us could count. Then Lily came along when we'd almost stopped hoping. To us, every Christmas with her still felt like a miracle. She carefully handed Denise the first ornament. A small wooden cardinal painted bright red. Denise turned it over once. "Oh," she forced a laugh. "Homemade." Nobody spoke. She set it on the coffee table instead of the tree. I guess that's what people do when they can't afford real presents. Emily kept smiling. "They're made with love." Denise shrugged. "That's usually what people say when they're broke." I looked toward my mother. Margaret heard every word. She simply sipped her wine. That wasn't new. Over the years, I'd watched dozens of little moments exactly like this. A comment about Emily's clothes. A joke about where she'd grown up. A remark about her old waitress job. Nothing loud enough to start a fight, just enough to leave a bruise. Every single time I'd convinced myself it wasn't worth making Christmas uncomfortable. Every single time Emily had quietly let it go. Lily tugged gently on Emily's sleeve. "Mom," Emily leaned down. "Yeah, sweetheart. Did Aunt Denise not like it?" Emily smiled with heartbreaking patience. "Some people just show excitement differently." I wished I believed that. Dinner started a few minutes later. The conversation drifted from football to holiday travel plans. Kevin talked about replacing his SUV. Denise described an expensive vacation they'd booked for spring. Then almost casually, Denise looked at Emily. "You know, I still can't believe David married someone from a trailer park." A couple of nervous chuckles floated around the table. Emily set down her fork. "Denise," her voice stayed calm. "Please stop." Just that. No yelling. No insults. Just 2 words. "Please stop." Margaret suddenly pushed back her chair. Before I understood what was happening, she crossed the room. Her hand struck Emily's face with a sharp crack. The entire house froze. Emily didn't even raise a hand to defend herself. Margaret stared down at her. "She's right." Her voice was cold. "You'll always be trailer trash to me." She pointed toward Lily. "Take your daughter and get out." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. Then I heard something much worse. A tiny voice beside me. "Dad!" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Did Grandma kick us out because Mom's poor?" That question broke something inside me. I knelt beside her chair. I took both of her little hands. "No, sweetheart." I looked straight into her eyes. "Grandma forgot what kindness looks like." Lily nodded once. She didn't completely understand. Maybe she wasn't supposed to. I stood up. Still nobody said a word. Kevin looked stunned. Denise folded her arms as if she'd won an argument. My mother waited for me to apologize. Instead, I walked over to Emily. A red handprint had already begun forming on her cheek. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She nodded even though we both knew she wasn't. I helped her into her coat. Lily slipped her backpack over one shoulder without being asked. As I reached for our gift bag, I noticed one ornament lying beneath the edge of the dining table. It had shattered when someone knocked it to the floor during the commotion. Lily's ornament, the one she'd painted herself. I crouched down, picked up every broken piece, one by one. I placed them carefully back into the little craft box we'd brought from home. Then I carried it to the truck. No goodbye, no shouting, no threats. The drive back to Columbus felt longer than usual. Snow drifted across the highway in slow white ribbons. Nobody spoke for almost 20 minutes. Finally, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry." I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. "No." My voice cracked. "I'm the one who's sorry." She turned toward me. "I spent 27 years asking you to be patient," I said. "I should have been asking them to be better." She reached over and held my hand for the rest of the drive. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch under her favorite blanket, Emily went upstairs. I walked into the garage alone. Beneath my old toolbox sat a worn envelope in my father's handwriting. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside was one sentence that suddenly felt less like advice and more like a warning. "One day you'll have to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your family." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it back. When I finally went inside, my phone was vibrating across the kitchen counter. Mom, Kevin, Mom again, Denise. I turned it face down and went to bed. The next morning, fresh snow covered the backyard. The coffee maker had just finished brewing when I picked up my phone. 32 missed calls. 1 voicemail. My mother's name. I pressed play. Her voice was shaking. "David, please call me." I stood at the kitchen window staring out at the untouched snow. For the first time in 27 years, I did absolutely nothing. I wish I could tell you ignoring those calls came easily. It didn't. I stood in my kitchen with a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands while my mother's voicemail replayed in my head. "David, please call me." 27 years of habit told me to grab my truck keys. Go fix whatever had gone wrong. That's what I always did. Instead, I looked through the window. Lily was already outside in the backyard, bundled in her bright blue winter coat, trying to make the biggest snow angel she'd ever made. Emily stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. They laughed about something I couldn't hear. For the first time in years, I realized my family was only 3 people. The phone rang again. I turned it over without answering. Emily came back inside a few minutes later. "You don't have to decide today," she said gently. "I'm not deciding today." "What are you doing then?" I thought about it for a long moment. For once, I smiled sadly. "I'm doing nothing." That sounded simple. It wasn't. Doing nothing meant refusing to rescue everyone else. By the 3rd day after Christmas, another voicemail arrived. "Kevin, Mom's furnace quit. She's freezing over here. Call me." I knew that furnace. I'd installed the new blower motor myself 4 winters earlier. Every November, I'd clean the burners, replace the filter, and check the ignition. Not because anyone asked. Because if I didn't, nobody would. I deleted the voicemail. That afternoon, another winter storm rolled across central Ohio. The local weather report warned temperatures would drop below 0 overnight. Normally, I'd already be driving toward Dublin with my toolbox in the back of the truck. Instead, I helped Lily finish the treehouse bird feeder we'd started building before Christmas. She painted tiny cardinals on the sides. Emily watched us from the kitchen window with the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years. "Dad," Lily said, tightening one crooked screw, "is Grandma still mad?" I set my drill down. "I don't know." "Are we mad?" "No." "Then why aren't we going to help?" Kids have a way of asking questions adults spend years avoiding. I sat beside her on the workbench. "Helping someone is a gift," I said. "It stops being a gift when they believe they can hurt you and still expect it." She thought about that. "I think Mom always gave Grandma gifts." She did. And Grandma broke them. I looked toward the house where Emily was hanging birdseed ornaments on the back fence. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "people don't realize what they have until it isn't there anymore." That night, Kevin called 6 times. I didn't answer. The following morning, the news showed frozen water pipes bursting all over central Ohio. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. This time, Kevin sounded exhausted. "The basement flooded. We finally got a plumber, but because of the holiday weekend, they're charging a fortune." I knew exactly why. The shutoff valve sat behind a storage shelf in Margaret's utility room. I'd put a bright yellow tag on it years earlier. Apparently, no one had ever bothered to notice. I closed the message without listening again. It hurt more than I expected. Not because of the furnace. Not because of the money. Because every problem reminded me of another year I'd quietly fixed something without ever asking why nobody else learned how. Emily noticed the weight on my face. "You can still go." "I know. You won't be weak if you do. I also won't be protecting you if I keep pretending nothing happened." She walked over and took my hand. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your mother. I already did. She looked down. I should have done it years ago. That afternoon, we took Lily sledding at a nearby park. She laughed so hard she could barely climb back up the hill. Halfway through the afternoon, she slipped her little hand into mine. I like this Christmas better. I stopped walking. Even after what happened, she nodded. Nobody yelled today. Those 4 words stayed with me. Nobody yelled today. I realized my daughter had started measuring happiness by the absence of conflict. No child should have to do that. By the second week of January, the missed calls slowed down. Then an envelope arrived instead. Property tax reminder. It wasn't addressed to me. It had been forwarded accidentally because I'd handled the paperwork for so many years. I quietly placed it in a drawer. Not because I wanted Margaret to lose her home. Because it wasn't mine to manage anymore. For the first time, everyone involved would have to deal with responsibilities that had always magically disappeared. A few days later, I was replacing a loose cabinet hinge in our kitchen when someone pounded on the front door hard enough to rattle the glass. Kevin. His face looked older than I'd ever seen it. You've got some nerve. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside. Morning? Morning, he snapped. Mom's house is falling apart, she's drowning in paperwork, and you're acting like nothing happened. I didn't make her slap my wife. You know that's not what this is about. No, I answered calmly. I think it is. He rubbed both hands across his face. You've always handled this stuff. I know. So fix it. The words hung between us. For years they would have worked. Not anymore. I can't. His frustration turned into disbelief. You can't? No. You mean you won't? I didn't correct him. Kevin stared at me for several long seconds. Then he shook his head. I don't even know where to start. For the first time, I believed him. He truly didn't know, because he'd never had to. I glanced toward the basement door. Behind it sat a worn cardboard file box I'd filled over the years. Every receipt, every repair invoice, every tax payment, every insurance renewal, every doctor's appointment, everything no one else had ever bothered to notice. I looked back at Kevin. Maybe I said quietly, it's finally time you learned where to start. Kevin stood on my front porch for almost a full minute after I mentioned the file box. He looked past me toward the basement door. What file box? The one that explains why you don't know where to start. He frowned. I don't need a lecture, David. I wasn't planning on giving you one. For a second, I considered closing the door. Part of me wanted to. But another part remembered all the years I'd kept quiet because I thought silence was the same thing as kindness. It wasn't. Come inside. Emily looked up from the kitchen when Kevin walked in. She didn't say a word. She simply nodded politely before disappearing upstairs to help Lily with homework. I noticed Kevin watching her. The fading outline of the slap was still visible if you knew where to look. He lowered his eyes. I didn't know Mom would. I know. No. He swallowed. I really didn't. I believed him. That didn't erase what happened. It only explained part of it. I opened the basement door and walked downstairs. The file box sat exactly where I'd left it, tucked beneath a workbench, beside old paint cans and Christmas decorations. It wasn't anything special. Just a faded cardboard storage box with black marker across the side. Mom's house. I carried it upstairs and set it on the dining room table. Kevin laughed once. You've got to be kidding. I'm not. He lifted the lid. Inside were neatly organized folders. Year after year. Every folder labeled 2014, 2015, 2016, all the way to the present. He pulled out the first one. A stack of receipts. Property taxes. I nodded. You paid these when Mom's pension came up short. He opened another folder. Roof repairs. Then another. Furnace maintenance. Another. Home insurance renewals. Prescription copays. Water heater replacement. Snow removal. Tree trimming. Hospital parking receipts. Gas station receipts from dozens of trips to Columbus Methodist Hospital. Kevin stopped flipping pages. His voice became quieter. I don't understand. You weren't supposed to. What do you mean? I never wanted anyone to feel guilty. He stared at me. So, every time Mom thanked me for helping, I smiled sadly. You were usually thanking me. He sat down heavily. The room suddenly felt very small. I thought she handled all this herself. So did she. He looked confused. What? I never wanted Mom to feel like a burden. So you let her believe that everything somehow worked itself out. Silence settled between us. Finally, Kevin whispered, How much? I leaned back. I stopped adding it up years ago. No. His eyes stayed on the receipts. Tell me. I hesitated. Over $70,000? His head snapped up. What? Spread over 12 years. 70,000, give or take. He ran both hands through his hair. I had no idea. I know. He picked up another folder. Inside was a spiral notebook. What is this? My maintenance log. He opened a random page. January 9th, cleaned burners before winter storm. March 18th, replaced leaking shutoff valve. October 27th, checked roof flashing after wind damage. Every page looked the same. Dates, parts, costs, notes. No complaints. Just work. Kevin slowly closed the notebook. You came over this often. Usually once a week. His face went pale. I live 15 minutes away. I didn't answer, because there wasn't anything left to say. At that moment, Denise walked through the front door without knocking. I knew your truck was here. She looked at the table. What's all this? Kevin didn't answer. She picked up a receipt, then another. Oh, please, she rolled her eyes. So you kept records? I always do. She folded her arms. You're still her son? I waited. She continued. Children are supposed to help their parents. I nodded once. They are. There. She pointed toward me. So stop acting like some kind of martyr. I looked at her calmly. I never said children shouldn't help. Then what's your point? My point is, I gently closed the folder in front of her. There's a difference between choosing to help someone and having them believe they're entitled to it. She scoffed. Sounds like the same thing to me. No. I met her eyes. It isn't. The room fell quiet again. Kevin looked from me to Denise, then back to the box. His shoulders seemed to sink another inch. You never asked any of us for a dime. No. You never even mentioned it. No. Why, I smiled without humor, because I thought that's what family did. He looked like someone had punched him. I should have helped. You should have known. Before either of us could say anything else, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Richard Lawson, our family's attorney. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. David, Richard's voice sounded measured as always. I met with your mother this morning. I closed my eyes. I figured she would call you eventually. She has questions about the trust. I expected that. There was a pause. She's considering challenging your decisions as successor trustee. I almost laughed. What decisions? Exactly, he sighed. I told her you haven't exercised any extraordinary authority. In fact, you've gone beyond what the trust requires. I leaned against the wall. Did she believe you? Not yet. Another pause. David. Yeah. I've represented your family for almost 20 years. I know. I've rarely seen someone do more than the trust required. I looked toward the dining room. Kevin was still sitting there surrounded by 12 years of paperwork. Denise had stopped talking. For once, Richard spoke again. I think it's time everyone understands why your father appointed you. After we hung up, I stood there for a long moment. My father hadn't only left me responsibility. He'd left me something else. Permission. Permission to stop confusing sacrifice with love. When I walked back into the dining room, Kevin looked up. What now? I looked at the file box. Then at my younger brother. Now, I said quietly, you learned something Dad never wanted either of us to forget. I turned toward the old cabinet in the corner of the room. Inside, behind a stack of photo albums, lay a worn envelope addressed in my father's unmistakable handwriting. I had carried its words alone for years. Maybe it wasn't mine to carry anymore. I didn't open my father's letter that afternoon. I simply rested my hand on the envelope. Not yet, I said. Kevin looked confused. I thought you said Dad wanted us to know. He did. I slid the envelope back into the cabinet. But there are still some things you need to see first. The next morning, I drove to Richard Lawson's office in downtown Columbus. I hadn't wanted to go. After everything that had happened at Christmas, the last thing I wanted was another fight with my own family. Richard greeted me with the same calm handshake he'd used for years. He'd helped my parents prepare their estate plan after my father was diagnosed with heart disease. He knew every page of that trust better than anyone alive. Margaret is here, he said quietly. I figured. And Denise insisted on coming. That didn't surprise me either. Richard led me into the conference room. My mother looked older than she had just 3 weeks earlier. The confidence that usually filled the room whenever she entered was gone. Denise, on the other hand, still carried herself like someone expecting to win. She barely acknowledged me. Richard closed the door. A thick binder sat in front of him. So, he began, I've reviewed every document related to the Carter Family Trust. Denise leaned forward. Good. Richard ignored the interruption. I've also reviewed the financial records Mr. Carter voluntarily provided. He opened the binder. Property tax payments, page. Insurance premiums, another page. Roof repairs, another. Furnace maintenance, medical transportation, prescription assistance, emergency plumbing, electrical work, page after page after page. The room became quieter with every document he turned. Finally, Richard closed the binder. I have reached one conclusion. Everyone waited. He looked directly at my mother. David has done substantially more than the trust required. Denise crossed her arms. So, Richard didn't even glance at her. The trust obligated him to manage the property responsibly. He paused. It never required him to spend his own retirement savings maintaining your lifestyle. My mother blinked. What do you mean? Richard folded his hands. The trust protects your right to live in the house. Yes. It does not require David to personally pay expenses that exceeded your available income. Silence. If David had acted strictly as trustee, he let the sentence hang for a moment. He would have recommended selling the property years ago. My mother's face lost its color. What? The maintenance costs, taxes, insurance, and emergency repairs exceeded what the house could reasonably sustain. Richard looked at me briefly before continuing. Instead, David quietly absorbed those costs himself. Denise finally spoke. Well, that's what family does. Richard looked at her for the first time. No. His voice remained polite. Family helps because they choose to. He closed the binder. Entitlement is something entirely different. Nobody argued. Not even Denise. My mother stared at the polished wooden table. I didn't know. I believed her. She truly hadn't known. That somehow made everything sadder. Richard reached for another folder. There's one more matter. He slid a copy of the trust toward my mother. Your husband selected David as successor trustee because he believed David would make careful, compassionate decisions. My mother slowly looked up. So Harold knew. He knew David's character. Richard smiled gently. And after reviewing 12 years of records, he looked toward me. I'd say he chose wisely. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Denise pushed back her chair. So that's it? Richard nodded. There is no legal claim against David. And if we filed one anyway, it would almost certainly fail. She looked frustrated. But he stopped helping. After being assaulted and watching his wife publicly humiliated, Richard's expression never changed. A court would likely consider that understandable. Denise had nothing left to say. The meeting ended quietly. No dramatic shouting. No victory speeches. Just people standing up one by one carrying truths that suddenly felt much heavier than they had an hour earlier. Outside, Kevin caught up with me in the parking lot. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything today. I do. He rubbed the back of his neck. I kept thinking Mom depended on the house. I looked at him. Turns out she depended on you. I smiled faintly. No. She depended on the version of me that never said no. He nodded slowly. I don't think I ever really saw everything you were doing. I made sure you didn't. We stood there for another minute before going our separate ways. Life settled into an unfamiliar rhythm after that. The phone stopped ringing every day. Emily laughed more. Lily stopped asking whether Grandma hated us. Instead, she started talking about school again. One Saturday afternoon, she came running into the garage while I was organizing old tools. Dad, she waved a sheet of paper over her head. I won. What did you win? My ornament? She handed me the letter. Her elementary school had held a winter arts competition before Christmas break. The judging had been delayed because of the holidays. Now the results had finally arrived. First place. For the same hand-painted cardinal ornament Denise had laughed at. Emily read the letter twice before smiling. I'm so proud of you. Lily looked up at her. Do you think Grandma would like it now? Emily hesitated. Then she knelt beside her. I hope one day she'll understand why it mattered. That answer stayed with me. Not because it guaranteed anything. Because Emily still hoped. Even after everything, spring slowly replaced winter. The snow disappeared. The trees turned green again. Life became quieter than it had been in years. One evening while I was grilling burgers in the backyard, Kevin called. His voice sounded different. Tired. Mom wants me to ask you something. I waited. She wants to know if she could see Lily. I looked through the kitchen window. Emily and Lily were making lemonade together, laughing over something that had spilled across the counter. The sight filled me with both peace and caution. I'll think about it. She knows she doesn't deserve it. I know. A long silence followed. Then Kevin said something I never expected to hear. David. Yeah. I think she's finally starting to understand what she really lost that night. After we hung up, I stood alone in the backyard until the sun dipped below the trees. A few days later, an envelope arrived in our mailbox. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Margaret Carter. Inside was a single sheet of paper. There was no excuse. No explanation. Just one handwritten sentence. If you'll let me, I'd like to come to your 4th of July cookout. I folded the note carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. For a long time, I simply stared at it. Some wounds heal quickly. Others need more than an apology. And some decisions can't be made by the person who was hurt the least. I looked through the window toward Lily. If anyone deserved to decide what happened next, it wasn't me. The 4th of July arrived warmer than anyone had predicted. By noon, the backyard smelled like charcoal, fresh-cut grass, and Emily's homemade potato salad. Lily ran through the sprinkler with 2 girls from next door, laughing so hard she nearly slipped across the wet lawn. Every few minutes, she'd stop just long enough to check whether the burgers were ready before running off again. Watching her laugh without looking over her shoulder every few seconds was something I still wasn't used to. Peace had become unfamiliar. Kevin showed up first. He carried a bowl of baked beans and looked awkward standing at the gate. "You sure this is okay?" he asked. "I invited you." I wasn't talking about me. I knew exactly what he meant. Before I could answer, another car slowly pulled into the driveway. Margaret climbed out by herself. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just older. She wasn't wearing the expensive jewelry she usually wore to family gatherings. No perfectly styled hair. No carefully chosen holiday outfit. Just a simple blue blouse and comfortable shoes. In her hands was a small gift box wrapped in plain brown paper. For a moment, nobody moved. Emily quietly reached for my hand. I squeezed hers once. "It's your call," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "It's ours." Margaret walked across the yard, one careful step at a time. When she reached us, she didn't try to hug anyone. She didn't even look at me first. She looked at Emily. "I owe you something I've never given you." Emily waited. "My respect." The words hung in the warm summer air. Margaret took a slow breath. "I've practiced this speech for weeks." She glanced around the backyard. Would everyone mind if I said it now?" Nobody objected. Kevin quietly pulled out a chair for her. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood in front of all of us, unfolding a single sheet of paper from her pocket. Her hands trembled. "I spent most of my life pretending I came from somewhere better than I did." She looked toward the ground. "My father drank away almost everything we had." She smiled sadly. "We lived in a trailer for years." Emily looked surprised. So did Kevin. "I hated it." Margaret's voice cracked. "I promised myself I'd never be poor again." She paused. "Somewhere along the way, I stopped fearing poverty." She looked at Emily. "I started fearing people who reminded me of it." Silence settled over the backyard. "I judged you before I ever knew you." Another breath. "I convinced myself that where you grew up mattered more than the kind of woman you became." She wiped at one eye. When Denise made jokes, she shook her head. I should have stopped her. Instead, I joined her. Her eyes finally met Emily's. "The slap?" She closed her eyes for a second. "Is something I will regret for the rest of my life." Emily didn't speak. Margaret turned toward Lily. "I also hurt someone who had done nothing except love her grandmother." Lily instinctively stepped a little closer to her mother. "I understand if you never forgive me." Margaret slowly held out the little gift box. "I brought something." She handed it to Emily. Emily looked at me. I nodded. She carefully untied the ribbon. Inside lay a Christmas ornament. "The little wooden cardinal," Lily gasped. "It's mine." It was. The paint had been touched up. The ribbon replaced. The crack was still there if you looked closely. Margaret noticed Lily tracing it with one finger. "I couldn't make it perfect again." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "But I picked up every piece after you left." Emily looked at her. "You kept it?" Margaret nodded. "Every piece." She smiled through tears. "I thought if I could fix the ornament." Her shoulders sagged. "Maybe someday I'd learn how to fix what I broke." Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Some moments deserve quiet. Lily looked up at me. "Dad," I knelt beside her, just like I had 6 months earlier on Christmas Eve. "Yes, sweetheart." She glanced toward her grandmother. "Are you still mad?" I smiled gently. "How I feel isn't the most important thing right now." She frowned. "It isn't." I shook my head. "You were hurt too." She looked back at Margaret, then at Emily, finally at me again. "What happens now?" I rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. "That decision belongs to you." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked slowly across the yard. Margaret stayed exactly where she was. She didn't reach out, didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't even speak. Lily stopped in front of her. "My ornament isn't perfect anymore." Margaret nodded. "I know." Lily smiled just a little. "Neither is our family." Then she wrapped both arms around her grandmother. Margaret quietly cried into Lily's shoulder. Emily leaned against me. I wasn't expecting that. Neither was I. A few minutes later, everyone finally sat down to eat. The conversation wasn't loud or forced. It was simply careful. And somehow that felt more honest than all the fake smiles we'd shared over the years. After dinner, Kevin helped me clean the grill. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have carried more of the load. You can start now." He nodded. "I will." For the first time, I believed him. As the sun began to set, Margaret walked over one last time. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. They won't, I answered honestly. She lowered her head. I know. We'll visit. She looked up hopefully. But there are going to be boundaries. I understand. No insults. There won't be. No comments about Emily. Never again. And if Lily ever feels unwelcome, Margaret finished the sentence herself. You'll leave. Yes, she smiled sadly. I would too. When she drove away that evening, I realized something surprising. I didn't feel like I'd won, because this had never really been about winning. It was about finally choosing the people who had quietly chosen me every single day. Later that night, after the fireworks faded and Lily had fallen asleep with her repaired ornament, sitting on her bedside table, Emily and I sat together on the back porch. She rested her head against my shoulder. You know, she said, your dad was right. I smiled. He usually was. He told you to protect your family. I looked through the window toward Lily's room. I finally did. The strange thing about boundaries is that they don't always push people away. Sometimes they become the only bridge strong enough to rebuild a relationship the right way. If there's one lesson this experience taught me, it's that love should never require you to sacrifice your family's dignity. The people who truly love you will eventually learn to respect your boundaries, or they'll show you why those boundaries were necessary in the first place. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, thank you for spending this time with me. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting the people you love, I hope you know you're not alone.